So if you're anything like me, you probably thought that with the announcement and the official release of a Nintendo Switch OLED model being around the corner on October 8th, that we probably would not be talking about any other versions of the Switch for the foreseeable future. And if you thought that like I did, you would be wrong, because we have a brand new Bloomberg article that just went live that we have to report upon, as they are claiming that Nintendo is actually asking over 11 different companies to develop games in 4K for the Switch for a model that potentially launches as soon as next year. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, we're just covering one massive story today. We're not doing the traditional news how we normally do, because we got a surprise article from Bloomberg that is claiming that Nintendo is not only planning this OLED revision that we already know is around the corner on October 8th, but that they are actually asking their developing studios that develop the games for the Nintendo Switch to develop games in 4K, and it is supposedly for a model that is set to launch as soon as next year. Now, we have to go back to a little bit of history real quick before we read through this article with Nintendo and Bloomberg, because if you guys don't recall, all of the initial reports that were suggesting that there was going to be a new model of the Switch were originating from Bloomberg, and they claimed that not only would the Switch have an OLED display, it would be the same footprint as the traditional Switch, but that the bezels would be shrunk down to actually have a 7-inch display included in there. And that did come true, obviously, with it being OLED technology. Where they missed the mark on their initial reports was their claims that Nintendo was asking developers to get games ready for 4K performance, and everybody assumed that this Switch OLED model was going to be the long rumored Switch Pro that I'm sure you've seen plenty of videos and articles about on the internet. And obviously, when only part of their reports came true, a lot of fans were very divided on whether or not Bloomberg had quality info or if they were speculating. And the infamous Takahashi Machizuki was even called out directly from Nintendo without his name being used. Nintendo's investor account on Twitter actually made this entire post basically just saying that the recent news outlets and reports from Bloomberg were actually completely inaccurate, and you've never really seen Nintendo fire shots at another reporting company like that. And so it was a really interesting topic when that all unfolded. Well, now I want to get you guys up to speed with the new article that Bloomberg has just published, and it's basically claiming that we are going to be getting a 4K Switch at some point. And while it's not official that Nintendo will follow through with the plans, there are definitely plans right now, as developers supposedly have these 4K development kits that they can actually make Switch titles run at 4K. And we're going to get into some speculation talk as well, because we know we have that mysterious update firmware in the dock that's been added in, and I don't know if that plays into this or not, but we got to first get on the same page with all the information that's out there from Bloomberg directly. So let's hop over there and read the article real quick together. Developers are making games for a Nintendo 4K console that doesn't exist. At least 11 companies, including Zynga, have tools from Nintendo to make 4K Switch games. Many people were surprised to learn that Nintendo Co.'s new video game console is missing a common feature of rival systems: support for high-fidelity 4K graphics. Perhaps most perplexed were the numerous developers who were working on 4K games using a software toolkit provided by Nintendo. Employees at 11 game companies said their teams were in possession of Nintendo's 4K development kit for Switch. The company spanned the globe, ranging from large publishers to small studios, including at least one that's never made a console game before, Zynga Inc., according to the employees, who asked not to be identified because they weren't authorized to discuss their projects publicly. The latest model of the best-selling Nintendo Switch is set to go on sale October 8th. It will sport a larger screen than the current versions, use OLED technology for better color and contrast, and at $350 cost more than its predecessors. But a system capable of handling 4K games isn't expected to be released until late next year at the earliest, people familiar with the plan said. That leaves Nintendo at a technical disadvantage to rivals, whose shares have soared this year while Nintendo's have lost 20%. It also risks alienating developers who have spent months tailoring their games to take advantage of the upgraded hardware capabilities. Nintendo responded to a list of questions by saying Bloomberg's reporting is inaccurate and declined to specify which parts of the information it was referring to. Bloomberg began reporting on the details of the product more than a year ago, including the bigger OLED display, the fall release, and the higher price. It was also supposed to contain a faster chip from Nvidia Corp that would enable 4K graphics when connected to a television, people familiar with the plan said in March. Nvidia declined to comment. But the 4K capability didn't come to pass. It's unclear when the design changed. The reason, according to a person familiar with Nintendo's hardware planning, was component shortages, a far-reaching problem born outside of the COVID-19 pandemic. After unveiling the Switch OLED, Nintendo said it had no plans for launching any other model at this time. By the time Nintendo showed off the new console in July, the company had already handed out the 4K kits to outside developers and asked them to design software to support the higher resolution. A development kit which is used to test unfinished games is a standard instrument in the game-making process. The Nintendo Switch kit contains extra memory to accommodate debugging software and additional ports to facilitate a connection to a computer, but otherwise has similar capabilities to the hardware that consumers would have at home. The kit for the original Switch, like consumer products, transmits video to a TV monitor at 1080p resolution. The new one does 4K. The lack of 4K in next month's products is significant because it puts Nintendo's system at a technical disadvantage. Microsoft Corp and Sony Group Corp have offered 4K capable consoles for several years and released even more powerful hardware in 2020 that continues to see insatiable demand. The Nintendo Switch, which came out in 2017, is still selling well, and early pre-orders for the Switch OLED in the US and Japan suggest it will be another hit, though Microsoft Xbox Series X and Sony's PlayStation 5 are only going to grow stronger as more games come out that take advantage of their increased power. Developers declined to speculate on Nintendo's plans for another console, but said that they expect to release their 4K Switch games during or after the second half of next year. Last month, Zynga said that Star Wars Hunters, a game for the Switch and smartphones, will likely be delayed until 2022 after initially being planned for release this year. Although Bloomberg identified 11 companies using the 4K kits, the actual number is probably much higher. Nintendo could still decide not to release a 4K Switch. The Kyoto, Japan-based company has quietly shelved numerous projects over the years for strategic reasons or technical challenges. One noteworthy example is a sleep monitor called Quality of Life that the company unveiled in 2014 and never sold. For developers that expended considerable resources preparing for a 4K console, the lack of an upgrade would complicate plans and may add the burden of converting their projects to support lesser hardware. So I really just think this is a fascinating situation to watch unfold because, you know, if you're Nintendo, you got to be hating Bloomberg at this point as they're trying to release a brand new OLED revision that is set to hit the market next month. And then you have this giant article, this giant corporation, which if you guys don't know who Bloomberg is, like, they're for investors. This is not some, you know, Video Games Chronicle or Nintendo News, like Nintendo Everything. It's not any of those sources or outlets. It's literally for investors to know what is going on in the internals of companies so they won't know when to pump their big money into them and when to invest, and then also when to sell and position it towards other companies. So this is a pretty major article for Bloomberg to go out there and report ahead of Nintendo's official release of the OLED model. And you know, if these reports are true, which it does sound like, I mean, 11 companies confirming that they have some kind of 4K Switch dev kit does definitely point to that Nintendo is absolutely working on something here. Now, why would they have a 4K dev kit in all of these people's hands if they're just going to shelve the product? And while it doesn't mean that it definitely comes out as soon as next year, it does mean that Nintendo definitely has plans to bring 4K to the Switch lineup at some point in time. Now, could they kick that can down the road and wait until the entire next gen of whatever the Switch 2 is, or hopefully the Super Nintendo Switch, as I would like to see it branded? Yes, that's possible, but this could be another one of those situations of where there's smoke, there's fire. And if you had a reason to wait and skip on the OLED model and you just wanted to wait until there's some kind of performance improvement, it's now looking like we may be able to expect that as soon as the back half of next year. And maybe they do it in the same time window as we saw them do with the Switch OLED model. I mean, there's really no telling at this point, but this is clearly indicating that Nintendo has some plans for 4K on the Switch. And you know what? They gotta hate Takahashi Mochizuki at this point, and they gotta be having a lot of like just frustration with these articles coming out, as we've never even seen Nintendo go on record calling out publications before for inaccuracy, but they were calling out Bloomberg for that. So, you know, obviously that's what you would say if you're a company. Like, you don't want some kind of inside reporting organization outing your plans before they're officially known to the public. And it is totally possible that Nintendo originally wanted this OLED model to be the 4K model, but you know, because of the chip shortage, they pivoted and they just said, let's do a better handheld upgrade for now, and we will save this 4K for a future revision. And this is not out of character for Nintendo, because to give you guys some perspective, we did see them do this same kind of upgrade pattern with the 3DS line, as we had the 3DS XL and then we had the new 3DS XL just out the following year that was actually a bigger horsepower upgrade. And there was even a couple games, I know there was a Xenoblade game that actually could only run on the new version of that 3DS hardware. So will they continue a similar upgrade path like that to the Nintendo Switch, and then maybe the Switch 2 or Super Nintendo Switch comes out later on down the line? Because we know from Nintendo in their investor meetings, they're claiming that the Switch is roughly about halfway through its life cycle in this 5-year point that we're at right now. So that does mean that we really have, potentially another 4 to 5 years left of Switch consoles. And I do think that in that 4 to 5 year time period, there's going to need to be a 4K revision at some point, as that is just predominantly what most people own on their TVs now. And if you look at the prices of 4K televisions, they have plummeted dramatically. I mean, that you can find them at Walmart super cheap. Almost nobody sells a 1080p base model TV anymore. So it's just one of those things that Nintendo's going to need to get up with the times, especially if you talk about third-party support and other games that can only really be run on the Series X and the PS5 right now because of their increased horsepower. And while I don't think that the Switch revision will be anywhere near as powerful as those consoles, you could just get it a little bit closer to being able to run certain games in 4K with a solid frame rate and not having to just chug along like Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is already clearly showing that a Switch's age. So I was always one of the believers that I did think that Bloomberg was accurate on their reporting, and I did expect a 4K Switch, and so I was extremely surprised when the OLED model did not get that 4K upgrade. But then you had a bunch of people start to talk about the fact that this new firmware update that came out with the Switch had a dock firmware upgrade section added into the software on the Switch, and that caused a lot of speculation. Is like, why do you need to update a dock that only has a LAN port and an HDMI in there? Supposedly, like, there's really not a reason. Maybe a LAN port would need to be updated, the firmware, at some point, but then there's also that conversation of maybe this dock will roll forward and be compatible with a future model of the Switch that is capable of something like 4K. So I would really love to hear from you guys and all your opinions around these new reports that we're getting that suggesting that we may be around the corner next year from a 4K model Switch, and whether or not you think that this is just Bloomberg doubling down on previous claims that they were wrong about, or if you're like me and you think that there really could be some credible information in here and that we may be getting some kind of additional revision as soon as next year, if not into the beginning part of 2023. So I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you guys around this topic, so make sure you comment down below before you leave the video today. So just as I wrapped up filming that video that you guys just watched, there is another new major development that I got to give to you guys at the end of this thing here, because Nintendo on their investor account just tweeted out a response to Bloomberg's article that just went live. And this is like a crazy deal because Nintendo, it's not like them just to call out a company for falsification or false reports. And this is what they're exactly doing with this new report, which of course is what you would do if you, even if you did have real plans for something. But I got to share the tweet with you guys because they are absolutely going the opposite direction of all of the claims that Bloomberg has put out there. So let's read through their tweet together real quick. So the verified Nintendo Co. Ltd account on Twitter tweeted out the following in the response to the Bloomberg article that we just covered right now. A news report on September 30th, 2021 falsely claims that Nintendo is supplying tools to drive game development for a Switch with 4K support. To ensure correct understanding amongst our investors and customers, we want to clarify that this report is not true. We also want to reinstate that as we announced in July, we have no plans for any new model other than Nintendo Switch OLED model, which will launch on October 8th, 2021. So again, what a crazy thing. Like I said, like if you're Bloomberg right now, you know Nintendo hates you, right? And you know that, whatever they do have planned, you're messing it up. And even if it's not planned, you're then getting people's hopes up for 4K. So there is like a really interesting kind of drama style situation unfolding here between Bloomberg and Nintendo. And so it's kind of a crazy thing to watch unfold. But, again, in my stance on all of this is if these reports are accurate, and I do tend to think that Nintendo is working on something 4K, is that just where I fall on this issue. I think that Nintendo would come out and say something like this, like, of course we have no plans, dummy, like we haven't even launched our current revision, don't spoil the next revision that's around the corner. So maybe it's all false. Maybe, Takahashi Mochizuki just simply has bad contacts and bad informations, and he's just making up claims of 11 different companies having these dev kits, but I don't necessarily believe that to be the case. So it's all going to be a watch and see situation. Obviously, we don't have the official info until Nintendo gives it to us, and that's always, until then, will remain to be rumor and speculation, but I did want to give you that quick update before you guys leave the video. Thanks so much for watching the video today, everyone. I do truly appreciate you all sticking around until the end. I do at this point in the video want to invite you all one more time to join Sunbro Nation if you haven't done so already. Do so by subscribing below, hit the like button on your way out if you enjoyed it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. That's going to do it for me, guys. I hope you all have a great day. Sunbro Nation, out.